94.3 The Dude is very grateful to our men and women in uniform. We're proud to recognize local members of our military by turning the spotlight on them right now in our Soldier Salute.
Thank you to the Columbia Fireflies and all of our friends at Seger Communications for providing tickets for this week's featured soldier. I'm your host, United States Marine Corps veteran Ethan Stitch Gardner. And on today's Soldier Salute, I have United States Army veteran, two-time recipient of the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, Waco Cotney. Waco, thanks so much for being here with me today. It's a real honor to have you. I understand that your family lineage goes back many, many years here in South Carolina.
Well, it's a pleasure being here. Yes, we do go back to 1754 here in South Carolina. Ended up over in Saluda County and around the traffic circle with my great-great-grandparents. We've had my oldest granddaddy who fought in the Revolutionary War as a loyalist fighting for King George because King George gave him so much land here. But we've had relatives of some description that has fought in every war that America has ever fought in. So we have a proud heritage here in America and in a military service, and we are grateful to be able to serve our nation. My great-great-great-granddaddy, Daniel Cotney, in the Revolutionary War, like I say, he fought on the side of the Loyalists, but he was a lieutenant with Colonel William Carey's regiment in the Dutch Fork area and was probably killed by that old swamp fox down at the Battle of Camden. That's okay, too. We still became Americans, and we still proudly serve.
Waco, you mentioned the traffic circle out in Prosperity. Now, a lot of people in South Carolina know that traffic circle. We use it to travel to work all over the state, but you know it for another reason.
Yes, indeed, and it's actually over in Saluda County, and they're close to Batesburg, Leesville. But during World War II, it was one of the several places, including Bomb Island and Drew Island, used as a target range for the bombardiers out of Fort Jackson. It had quite a history for that. But in the early 1900s, my grandparents moved across the river. It was still a river then. My granddaddy being a timberman, as they began to clear the land for Lake Murray in the mid to late 1920s. He helped cut some of that timber out and I guess made some pretty good money. And we ended up growing up on the backwaters of Lake Murray up until 1890, known as Frog Level. And I've got some plates and everything at home for the centennial of Frog Level of Prosperity, South Carolina. Suddenly, everything began booming in the 1960s and lake property started selling. And I can remember when some got sold for $1 a foot on the lake.
Wow.
And just small buses, places to put a school bus or a one-room fishing shack. Up Bill Holland's Landing, Buffalo Creek, and where Plantation Point is now, we hunted squirrels and quail and fished all the way around and have a stringer full of fish. But suddenly it's all become home places and resort areas and retiree centers, just like in Chapin. It's had massive growth since the 60s, so we call it progress, I guess, but stomping grounds of playing with boys barefoot running through the woods and playing fox and hounds is all gone for most everybody now.
Waco, like I've told you already, thank you so much for your service. You are a member of the most decorated and longest-serving unit in Vietnam, the 173rd Airborne Brigade.
That's correct. The longest-serving Army unit. They're the 5th Marines went in before we did, but 173rd came in, and we were there for 7 years. As well as I can remember, we have 14 battle streamers, more decorations for Medal of Honor recipients, Silver Stars, Distinguished Service Cross, Purple Hearts, over 6,000 Purple Hearts. Just during Vietnam alone, we had an outstanding unit that was Westmoreland's pet, sort of, to move from one area of the country to the other. In one 3-week battle in November, we had 3 to 5 Medal of Honor recipients out of that, including the chaplain of our 2nd Battalion, Chaplain Waters, and I must give him credit, and a couple of machine gunners, a couple of medics. Many have received the Medal of Honor there. Big and Rich does a great song on our unit of the 8th of November, worth listening that was in 8th of November of 1965, and nearly 2 years later we had 20% casualties and loss of life. Over 70 to 80% of 12 rifle companies was wiped out in November of 67. I served as a medic to go in and patch up those that needed patch up and make sure they took the malaria pills and the water purification tablets and all that. But one little thing that we did, and this is going to be a surprise from my host here.
Well, who doesn't like surprises?
We'd leave our little calling card on trees, and we had whole decks of playing cards sent to us with just one card in those decks of playing cards that we passed out as the 173rd's calling card to an area that was infested with North Vietnamese regulars or Viet Cong, and that was the ace of spades. And
oh my gosh.
And a little message to them on the back.
And that message says, "We have arrived, the 173rd Brigade." Waco, the 173rd Airborne Brigade goes back a long time. You guys have a really illustrious history. Tell us a little bit about the 173rd Brigade Association. Something around 5,000 to 6,000 members in this association?
That's correct, and this extends nationwide and international. We have a few members that's joined the association that is active duty, that's stationed in Italy and Germany. They've also served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We were disbanded for a few years. We got stood back up, and they've been serving gallantly ever since. But we have about 5,000 or 6,000 members, and we have a national reunion every year, different parts of the country. South Carolina unit just hosted it again this year in June down in Charleston, and we had approximately 800 people attending between paratroopers and spouses and our children or grandchildren. And so I was appointed by our national president, and I am now the national chaplain for the 173rd Airborne Brigade Association. Again, we have great camaraderie. We have vendors coming in. We do sightseeing tours. Got to go out on to Yorktown the same day that they had the D-Day Memorial. Last year we were up in Washington, D.C., and the tours to the National Mall and to the Lincoln Memorial. We have a great time with our reunion, and instead of joining the Navy and see the world in the association, we get to see most parts of the United States. And 3 years ago in San Diego, California, I got to meet my platoon leader from Vietnam for the first time in nearly 50 years, and then got to see him and a couple other officers in Charleston. And he comes all the way from Tacoma, Washington. So it was a great time seeing these guys.
Waco, we talked earlier about the importance of the Purple Heart Award. Now, guys in my generation, we're starting to come home and starting to feel a little less proud of that award. What would you say to some of those guys coming home with that mentality?
Well, yesterday was the National Purple Heart Day, and it is the oldest decoration from George Washington times and the Revolutionary War, and only a handful were given out that time, and it fell into disrepute until General MacArthur got it reinstated, and he received Purple Heart 0001. I have a Purple Heart and 2 Bronze Stars, but they have significance, and that Purple Heart is the oldest one, and it is given to those who were actually wounded in combat or who have died in combat. And it's a great identifier out there that we can bond with others of like order that have gone through that experience and open up doors. I've had many people to stop me on the highways and talk with me about that. I was shot 3 times, and I think my blood was worth that little piece of metal, and I don't go around bragging and boasting about it, but it is a badge of honor. But it's something that is very significant, and it should not be something that we're ashamed of. Whatever war one has been in, that is a mark of distinction, not that you've done something foolishly, but if you have a Purple Heart on different occasions, even if you're not still in the military, wear it on lapel pins or cap pins, and it's a sign of respect to everyone.
Waco, you can find a lot of similarities in the Vietnam War and the Iraq and Afghan War, but something that's not very similar is the return home.
And that's pretty much true. A lot of times for Iraq and Afghanistan, whole units come. And I used to, maybe like most everybody saw back in the 60s, the National Guard is a way to dodge the draft and not go to combat. I've got a much greater respect for National Guard and reserves and all these now, that they're having to pull multiple tours of duty. But usually they go en masse and they come back en masse. But most of us did not go en masse except at the very beginning to Vietnam, or at the very end as they started closing the war down. Entire units would start coming back home together. Most of the time you were wounded or you finished your 1-year tour of duty, and if you did not choose to get a promotion and to go back and stay back, and many were treated. I don't have to go back to the litany of what took place there, but many were spit on, many were classified as baby killers, and much more war monsters. We could just go on and on with the ridicule and scorn because of facial injuries from gunshot wounds. It was quite different. Most of the folks that I see now, if they walk through an airport even by themselves, they're greeted by nearly everyone going through and thanking them for their service. And I say this for the Vietnam veterans, just tell them thank you. Most of them don't want to hear a welcome home 50 years after they got back home and after the way they were treated back then. But any person, man or woman, that served our country, give them a thank you for their service.
Waco, you talked about sustaining a couple injuries in Vietnam, and as I sit here with you in the studio, I notice that you have a really nice scar right on your cheek. Is that a wound that you received in Vietnam?
Yes, it's one of those. During this Battle of November and the big Battle of Dak To that lasted about 3 weeks, where the 173rd had 3 battalions, which is about 1,200 men. We had nearly 900 of those that was killed or wounded. I had been out for over 8 months and had finally gotten a relief for one day and back to battalion aid station, and medics started being wounded again. They're one of the highest casualty rates because they're up doing their job trying to save somebody as quickly as possible. I went back and stayed with my same company, and the next day they started a bombing run in on the hill across the valley from us against North Vietnamese regulars who were equipped with gas masks and well dug in, well trained, well disciplined, just like we were. Late in the afternoon, we finally got on top of the hill, and I'd given my gas mask away the day before, and so I had to walk through tear gas, and a huge North Vietnamese ambush took out about half of my company. I was wounded first in the back. It was like a bee sting, and as I was kneeling working on this fellow sky soldier, a sniper chained and padlocked in the trees to help the North Vietnamese get back across the Cambodian River to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, shot me in the jaw and in the right shoulder, and I laid out all night that night, and was not till the next morning that we were able to get medevac choppers in. Like I say, nearly everybody in our small company of 125 people, and 25 were killed that day, and another 25 or more wounded that day. Got one friend here in South Carolina that I served with it during that time that was wounded the same day I was. That's Walt Cook up in Greenville. I've got another friend, Andy Ireland from down in Florida, a radio operator out in Missouri, Claire Moore, and my platoon lieutenant for years from out in Spokane, Washington. And so to everyone that has served in whatever capacity, whether during peacetime or during wartime, when you sign on that dotted line, you say you're signing that blank check up into including your life. And I want to say thank you to all of those that have served whatever branch of service. You are part of our nation's fabric that makes us the greatest nation in the world.
Thanks for joining us in our Soldier Salute, presented by Little Pigs Barbecue, serving Columbia since 1963 with that bodacious buffet, and by Lexington Guns and Shooting Range, veteran owned and operated, and by Franklin Equipment, rent, buy, rely, and Atkins Law Firm Workers' Comp Attorneys. Who you hire matters.